I'm middle class. I'm called Camilla. I live a very privileged lifestyle. I wasn't like Matthew, who was on the panel last week, who was once homeless. I wasn't that impoverished child of Thatcher who ended up going to Oxford University, Bridget Phillipson. So I can't talk about how much I suffered in childhood. But I think there is a strain that runs through the report that I think crosses geographical, class and demographic boundaries. What does lost actually mean? Lost really means that we're talking about boys who, for various reasons, are alone. They're fatherless, so they're alone. They don't have a male role model. They may be falling behind, as Miriam said, at school, and therefore there's a degree of loneliness associated with that. Maybe they've been dragged into crime, which again is a lonely place for a teenage boy to occupy. And if I apply that to my own life and my own children, I've got 2 daughters and then I've got a 15-year-old son sandwiched in between. And we've been having some discussions lately about sort of the online space and mental health. And I think actually one of the fundamental threads running through all this, if I may be basic about it, is that children are spending far too much time alone and online. But I think this is especially a problem when it comes to boys. So what happened between when I was brought up in the 1970s and now, that back in my day, if I was sent to my room by myself, it would be a penalty. And yet these days, we've got children, particularly boys, alone in their room for a great deal of time. And we intrinsically know that children haven't changed. Technology's changed. Children haven't changed. Some young people came in uniform. I'm not sure where exactly the group that you belong to. What is the group? The Sea Cadets. And you're in the Sea Cadets because you want to hang around with other young people. And the funny thing about being online is even online, boys particularly try to cultivate communities. They go on to Fortnite and they start playing with each other, or whether it's Grand Theft Auto or any of the other games. Intrinsically, boys, they get together in teams. I've got my children all into football because, frankly, it was the only way that we could think of to get them off screens. So when we're looking at treatment of women and who's informing them, they're watching far too much pornography by themselves. No guidance or oversight. Taking him on a long walk, which seems to be the best way to facilitate conversation with a 15-year-old these days. And he was saying, you have to understand, Mum, that it isn't about Andrew Tate and adolescence. You know, as far as my son's concerned, Andrew Tate is, quotes, a melt, which I'm sure that's a phrase you're familiar with these days.
I am, yeah.
He's a melt. Nobody wants to listen to him. It's not, for a lot of boys, it isn't as pernicious as Andrew Tate, the incel movement, strangulation porn. It's this idea that to be a man, you have to be emotionless, that you have to disassociate. Harry said to me, my son, you know, it's like the model you're meant to adopt is Patrick Bateman. I said, son, the name of his character was American Psycho. The clue is in the name. And I think actually we get quite obsessed with the sharp end of the wedge and the really, really dangerous stuff that they're doing. And we're missing the complete and utter mainstreamization of really destructive and devastating everyday influences on their lives. We've got to get them out of their bedrooms. We've got to get them back round the family telly. We've got to get them spending more time with their siblings, their peers, their friends, encouraging, frankly, God forbid, male bonding, and ensure that we have an everyday presence in their life that eclipses the presence that their mobile phone seems to have these days.
Thank you, Camilla. Great. Just on that, Joe, our policy director, you had a stat, which I'm not sure we've fully checked, but you might as well say it here. What's the stat about the loneliness thing?
This is that the average prisoner is spending more time outdoors than the average child.
Wow.
Heard it here first, but don't tweet it because we haven't checked it, just in case it'll hurt our reputation. But along those lines, fascinating, horrendous. Ian, let's have your final reflections if we can. Thank you.
Well, before I do, I know there's a number of cadets here. You're from a different cadet unit. It looks like an Army cadet unit. Is that right? Can you speak up?
Sea cadets.
Sea cadets still. Okay, so we've got the Sea cadets here, which is great, actually. Point that Camilla was making, which is after school, after all the other stuff, there are organisations in which you can engage, which are both physical, about comradeship, it's about learning discipline, all that stuff is really relevant, but not enough of it takes place. And what's interesting, I agree completely with what Camilla's just said. I think the biggest and most important section in this report, a great report, is to do with the breakdown of family structures, and the failure to understand the damage that's having, particularly with boys. It's having damage, by the way, with girls as well, but it has significant damage with boys. And we've seen him capable of debating this. Back in 2009, we produced the Breakdown and Breakthrough Britain reports, and it was in there as well. And we showed how the level of family breakdown was affecting both boys and girls. So you were getting girls in certain communities learning to live with lots of guesting fathers. There's a lot of abuse taking place in those families. Girls were unable to therefore understand that it's possible for a man to show a girl unconditional empathetic love, that everything is negotiated. Their mothers are abused. All this part goes on, and it begins to break down their idea of their own self-worth and their natural existing self-worth. It requires no negotiation about who they are. So we noted there that young girls were struggling on this. And the second bit of it was young boys, of course, were rapidly learning that actually commitment was not necessary, that you don't have to commit to anything, that somehow there's something else going on. And many of them, even before the age of 11, as we did a report on street gangs, were drifting into street gangs. So all of this is at the heart of this problem, which is, if you add to that the whole massive rise in the ability for people to enter the internet and get pretty much access to almost anything they want, Camilla's right, this becomes a lonely but obsessive occupation in which the lessons you learn from the internet when you visit pornography sites and all the rest of it are abusive lessons. They're about having what you want, taking it, whatever, no commitment whatsoever. Aggression is the nature of how men behave, and women are there to supply those men with what they want, regardless, and there's nothing else in it. So that natural breakdown has been unbelievably damaging. Men have disappeared from a lot of family life over the last few years. It's got worse. The report shows it's got worse. There's no way of dodging around it. The reality for this is the system, the state, has attacked stable family life for years. Taxation for married couples is the worst in the developed world. No other country, France, Germany, everybody else, has such appalling tax levels. If you are married, stay together. If one of you wants to stay at home whilst looking after the children and the other goes to work, you are penalized dramatically under the tax system. If you are on benefits, as I was trying to break down when I was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, what you find is immediately that actually the man is a drag anchor on your ability to get money in the benefit system, because if they're there, then that means immediately that you are not able to claim for the rates that you would do if they weren't there. So what happens is you get a lot of guesting fathers who are there but not there when it comes to the official figures. And this again is damaging, as I said earlier on, because lots of these guesting fathers have no commitment whatsoever to previous children and are often quite brutal and abusive. In my constituency, we have gang problems. We've had murders, we've had attacks, the kids living in the area and outside the area going on at the moment, and it's really difficult to deal with. And this is because many of those boys, as we wrote in our report on gang structure, many of those young boys, and it's mostly young boys in these gangs, many of those boys at the end of the day are searching for some kind of father figure, and they strangely and sadly believe that the authority of that senior man is running the gang is their father figure, and they drift into this. But of course it's brutal, dangerous, and they're more likely to die before they're 22 than they are likely to survive. All of this is part of the ground that we're looking at right now. But if we're not brave enough to tackle this and understand that amongst most of the developed world, certainly in Europe, we have some of the worst rates, family breakup, fatherlessness, and kids leaving their whatever family structure they had and ending up in gangs, dissolute often, on benefits, and a real problem. It's a crisis in the United Kingdom. This report is clear about that. Unless we are prepared to act on it and stop faffing around about worrying about what we say, but actually getting it done, then I'm afraid we won't solve this problem. It's there to be solved.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, I want to give the rest of the time for questions and thoughts. That's what this conference is about. So we've got no mic, so if you want to raise your hand, I'll try and pick you out and you've got to shout. We'll go down here in the middle first.
Yes, my name is Jane Newell. I'm an ex-deputy head teacher. Sadly, I could have told you those figures, and from my experience of male suicide and falling Dorset, and one of the best trainings I ever did when I was teaching was the difference between the way boys and girls learn. I stopped teaching 8 years ago. That training I carried out in probably about 1998. There's a lot of catching up to do. It's very, very slow. How are we going to accelerate this so that something gets done, because it's taking too long to find all this out?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I want to go to you, Miriam, on this, particularly on the schooling. And you mentioned things like boys and ADHD, the rise in this. There's been discussion now about over-medicalisation. What's your reflection on what Jane's saying and that in particular?
Well, I'm not overly optimistic that much is going to get done under this Labour government from a state intervention point of view, because I think although the government have been quite interested in the project and we've had a number of meetings, the kind of policy changes that would need to take place are frankly controversial and very difficult for a government that is, let's say, not popular at the moment. So, for example, we need to stop this habit of putting 9-month-old babies in full-time institutional care. It's terrible for children. All the evidence suggests that long hours in institutional care before you're 2 and possibly 3 are very detrimental, and yet this is now government policy, and that is the Conservative Party's fault, by the way. That was the most unconservative policy that a Conservative government has ever introduced, to deliberately separate a baby from its mother. But nevertheless, the current government is committed to carrying it forward because it wants to get mothers back into the workplace.
Is that because it's an economic policy, not a family policy?
Well, it is an idea to try and increase the GDP by getting more mothers back into the workplace. But it's, first of all, economically unsound, because if the government buys 80% of a particular product, in this case childcare, and fixes the price, unsurprisingly, private suppliers drop out of the market, which is exactly what's happened. But it's terrible for children. So we've got to stop this. We've got to use the $5 billion or whatever the early years budget is instead to help people to stay at home when their children are younger, to have a bit more of a mix of childcare with grandparents, aunts, whatever it is. That's much better for children. But I don't hold out any hope for that under the Labour government. The other thing that we could do quite rapidly is more sport in primary schools. That would really help boys. But again, I think that is a difficult ask for the current Labour government. However, we are Conservatives. We don't think the state is the answer to everything. There's a lot that families and communities can do. And I went to the Audacious Church in Manchester this morning. Never been there before. Went with a friend. Amazing Pentecostal church not far from here. There must have been 800 people there. It was absolutely incredible. And the guy preaching, young man in his early 30s, was talking about the desperate need for the church to rise up and be fathers and uncles and brothers to people in the community. And this is something that we can all do. We can look for lost boys to mentor as, as school leaders, as people who go to church, as the people who are part of Scouts and Cadets. There is a social answer to this, which is getting alongside people who don't have family and being that family to them. That would make more difference than a few extra PE lessons in school.
Very good. Ian, you wanted to come in.
I just want to come in on this, on the childcare point. When the then government back in about 2012 wanted to accelerate that process of access to childcare, what was interesting was that there was the beginning of question marks. It's very much called the Swedish model, where basically in Sweden what happened was that if you didn't put your child into childcare, you were heavily frowned upon in the community, that somehow you were being unhelpful to the rest of society, and therefore there's a very high level of these large, very clinical childcare centres. And what was interesting was that there was a report coming out that showed that actually, after all the years of that, there was a growing level of dysfunctionality amongst middle-class children, such as you normally might have seen in children from, say, the bottom 2 or 3 deciles. So this was a growth in dysfunctionality because the children got no attachment with your relations, particularly your grandparents, who come top of the list in place of the parents. Secondly, then relations, close relations, and then finally others when you move to childcare. The point about that, though, is government refuses point blank to engage itself with any support for grandparent care or anything else. They only do it when you go into an agency. And the other one is childminders they don't very much like, and they're likely to give you a greater level of attachment than, say, the large childcare centre. So it's this idea that government knows best and focusing on this, when in actual fact, given the choice, most the parents want somebody they know, that they're close to be able to look after their child if they have to leave it behind, but they don't want to leave it in a situation where it literally sits in no doubt a clinically clean environment, but without any sense of attachment.
To address what do young men want? And young men are saying they want a purpose, and there is this vacuum that exists. And his answer to that is do something, carry a weight, and take that weight, be it a responsibility, and become somebody. Where is the Conservative Party, and how do we take that into policy that actually reaches out to young people? Because if we don't do it, reform will, and I dread to think what that's going to look like.
Right,
think
two
that's
things
for you,
on
Ian.
this very quickly. I'll just deal with it. First of all, it's quite interesting because about 10 years ago, I remember a poll that said, for all the problems, who are the people that you consider to be your icons? In other words, the people that you would want to look to most of all. And about 80% said their parents. So all the talk about people outside, you know, wonderful, get famous quick people who do stuff, and actors and actresses and everything else, actually the truth was they still looked to their parents. We then did a poll for the report Breakthrough Britain to look at what happened to people after their families broke up. We really wanted to know, how did they feel about that? Was it as easy as people saying, break up for the sake of the kids? What happened to the kids? What did they think? What was fascinating about it when we did this polling, and there was a lot of people on it, we, you know, first of all, had your family broken up, divorced, or just separated, or whatever it was. And what was really interesting and felt desperate about this, that they felt bereft. They could deal with the arguments, they said, but they couldn't deal with the absence. And they found it really, really difficult to cope with that. And our policy doesn't ever match that reality, which is this attachment between parents and their children and the parents themselves is critical in the stable relationship that goes on, even as they were pointing out, when that is a difficult relationship. And I think, therefore, I haven't seen the Jordan Peterson stuff, but it's quite clear to me from what we do, we have to come back to square one and understand that what we should be doing is acting to support that stable process through family life, however it's formed, but to make sure, therefore, that that has a greater chance of succeeding, not do what we do at the moment, which is just dismiss it as just another way of living, and actually give it that support financially and in the benefit system. And that would help, and that would be a policy which we could bring through.
Camilla, can I ask you to comment on this? How do the Conservatives get a kind of step forward from reform on this in getting boys active and having them to do something?
Well, I think we've got to be careful as well that we don't get into the kind of zone of demonising working mothers. In my personal situation, you know, I had a stay-at-home mother, but she was an alcoholic, and she would have been a better mother had she have worked. And probably the reason why I am now a workaholic as opposed to an alcoholic, yet, is because I think that a happier mother in what she wants to do, be that stay at home or go out to work, creates happier children. So we don't need to get into this, you know, some of the reason why the late Charlie Kirk was criticised as he went down this kind of evangelical Christian faith and family, women should be at home. And I just don't think that chimes in with modern women any more than it chimes in with the actual needs of families these days to have both parents working. Economically, it has become a necessity. When it comes to the Conservatives, of course, Ian is precisely right that we had 14 years of Tory government that, from an economic perspective, actively penalised people for being together. You know, we couldn't talk about fatherlessness, we couldn't about family breakdown because it might demonise single mothers. It was a completely preposterous argument, really. So yes, I think tax incentives, not just for families, but I think it should be stressed working families. I mean, it's a perfect opportunity, actually. The Farage argument, because I've discussed it with him on this scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, which he once advocated, is because he is saying that if you are getting hard-working families that are hard up because he's driving a lorry the length and breadth of the country by night. She's working a nursing shift by day. That actually to penalise good, hard-working families who want to have children, and we need people to have children because we're currently in a birth rate decline in this country. Immigrants are having a lot of children, but British people aren't, and that is going to create an merry hell for us come 30, 40 years' time when we've got an ageing population that cannot be supported by enough young people. That, of course, everything in our power should be to incentivise people to work hard, both of them, bring up their children in a stable environment. And at the moment, frankly, the tax system remains the antithesis of anything that would possibly support that kind of family unit.
Thank you. We've now got a mic urgently. We've got you wanted a question here. Let's get the mic to you. We'd love you to stand. The uniform is fantastic. There you go.
Thank you very much. So I'm Aidan, I'm 17. Anna's been mentioned before, I'm part of the Sea Cadets. So something that I'd like to raise is that we are a male-dominated charity, both our cadet side and our volunteer side. Coming from a family where my father works offshore and I don't see him for a lot of the year, the volunteers and the Sea Cadets can be a really powerful role model for young people. Alongside the vocational training that we do, the qualifications we gain, the team building exercises and the friends we make, having that positive role model there can really help change the direction of young people's lives. What can be done to help promote volunteers getting into charities such like ours and others like the Army Cadet Force, the Royal Air Force Cadets, and what can be done to boost the numbers and encourage more people to volunteer, give their time and hopefully help other young people get on a better direction in life.
Very good. Excellent. Harry, what can be done? We need more volunteers. We need more male volunteers. We need to take a kind of out of the book of the Sea Cadets. What can be done?
Yeah, so there was an initiative that was under the New Labour era called Extended Schools. It was based on community schools in the US, which was basically, in addition to the kind of core thing a school does, which is obviously teaching, there would be provision for mental health support, pre and after school activities, and mentoring and support around young people, often provided by the voluntary sector. So this wasn't necessarily a massive expansion in the state. The state often subsidised it, but it wasn't. It was often voluntary sector organisations coming in to support. And that the evidence behind that was really, really strong, particularly for families that were struggling and more likely to, be in situations where actually the home environment wasn't very good for studying, or there was a single parent that had, challenged picking kids up on time, or couldn't give the support for homework and things like that as much as was needed. And the evidence behind it was really, really strong. And unfortunately, that was scrapped. And there has been some money put in, actually, under the Conservatives first, and then Labour, I think, offered to put a bit more in. But frankly, not enough to replace that provision. And I think we could do a lot to make sure that schools are not just doing the kind of basics, which they should focus on and do well, and that's what teachers should be focusing on, but that there is provision around schools, particularly for more vulnerable kids, to make sure that that support is accessible and that we're encouraging kids to do stuff outside of school, so they're not, in the way that Camilla talked about, sitting at home on their own.
Yeah, we did a paper actually post-pandemic on extending the school day, but not just doing it through, and it was based on that model that you say, Harry, but using community groups, sports groups and all the rest to actually run things through the school to bypass the unions that will stop anything good happening and actually get some real life back in and get some male volunteers. Ed, can I just come to you? You're about to, Ed's our research, you heard him before, you may have forgotten him already. But Ed, on volunteering, male volunteering in particular, how's that looking in the UK?
It's looking pretty awful. We've just gone into field with some polling on this because we saw some numbers in Scotland that said only about 1 in 10 people in Scotland volunteer. So we're now polling for the whole UK to see what's going on. But there is a big problem of volunteering. It's going down and down and down. Just very briefly, 2 things. The government can signal, this is important, it's just actually said that it wants volunteering to be part of a good citizenship test. If you are not volunteering, you will not pass a good citizenship in the test. Let's make a big deal of that. Second thing I would always say, always personal invite. If I ask someone to close that door, no one's going to close it. If I say you, close that door, you'll go and close it. Always ask.
I'm not sure he would. He looks a lot harder than you, to be honest. He's very uniform. Yeah, very good. Well, that's such a good point that we need to clock on, and we're bringing out some work on this. Ian.
Just quickly on that, is it because men won't volunteer because they're afraid of being branded paedophiles?
Bring back the male-only scouts, that's what Ed's going to say.
The second bit I just the corporal who got up earlier on and talked about what happens, I also think that there's been a reluctance in schools to allow military-based organizations to go into schools and recruit. I mean, all of these, and be proud about the fact if they want to be a cadet to support their country, that's a very high level of volunteering. So we've got to stop this ridiculous political correct idea that somehow if you talk about the military, it's going to upset everybody. Actually, a lot of kids, particularly boys going through the military that I used to see, came out better people, stronger people, better citizens.
Very good. Okay, we'll go at the back here.
Thank you. I have got a question, but I just want to comment on cadets. I think cadets is fantastic and an excellent organisation for boys in particular. But my question relates to the data. And are we seeing any significant regional sort of massive differences across the country with regional figures in particular areas?
Thank you. I'll go to... I don't think there's any problems in Yorkshire because it's perfect in Yorkshire, to be honest. But Ed, any regional differences in the data? Or Miriam, do you... Actually, sorry.
Happy to defer to Ed. I think, yes, but it's more about income group and ethnicity. So white working class boys, particular problems, maps very well to family breakdown, really. So if you're a white working class boy, you're very unlikely to have a father at home, whereas Indian and Chinese children, for example, have family breakdown rates of only 6 or 7%. And unsurprisingly, Indian and Chinese kids do much better in school than any other group. So the regional differences are more about race and social class, I suppose. London is of course, a bit different. I mean, in London, children on free school meals, boys and girls, are way more likely to go to university than children on free school meals other parts of the country. So there are, we could go into why that is. But the disparities are more to do with family structure and income rather than region particularly. Is that right, Ed? Yeah. Top marks.
Good, thumbs up. We've got a question here. And then we'll come to you in front. Sorry.
Just more widely about my concern is that especially young women have grown up under this idea that we need to be focused on our careers and that actually having children should definitely be an afterthought. I mean, just looking at the reaction to Charlie Kirk and Erica, how lots of young women online don't like the idea that she says having a child is the most amazing thing a woman can do. And I think that's true, even though I'm an ardent feminist. But how will we ever untangle this postmodern ideology that actually the last thing that you should be thinking about in your 20s as a woman is settling down and having children, because you should be this girl boss who has a career. And now we have these really concerning statistics that if you're a woman over 30 and you haven't had a child yet, you're very unlikely to ever have children. Yeah. And we need to start having more children. But I think this ideology of just women not wanting to have kids because they feel like that's just too Christian and too conservative. How will we ever get rid of that idea?
That's such a good. Can I just respond very quickly to
please.
that? It's such a good point, because another finding in the Lost Boys report is how lonely young women are. And you're absolutely hitting in on something, which is this idea that, having children is some way anti-feminist. I mean, it's... I have a lot of girls at work, a lot of younger women, because I mentor a lot of younger women, and I think I'm going to mentor them about how to get ahead in journalism. And what I end up mentoring them on is, I want to get married, can I have a child? Is it going to affect my career? And my advice to them is always, the most important job you're ever going to do is be a mother. Doesn't matter what a journalist you are. I mean, I'm bad at both at the same time, but that's not so much a case of having it all as doing it all, but that's another story for another panel. So yes, we have to encourage women to do that. And of course, we also have to celebrate women who do not work, and there's not enough of that. I constantly celebrate one particular woman in my life called Debbie. Behind every successful woman who works is a successful woman who stays at home and helps that woman when her children leave their PE kits at home or get home sent home early, and you're in the office and that woman supports you. So yes, I totally agree that we do have a crisis if women under 30 think that there's something, I don't know, inherently awful about starting families, when anyone in this room who started a family knows it's the most life-affirming, best thing you can ever do.
I think the root problem is that since the 1970s, our kind of political guiding star has been individual adult autonomy. And the thing that we put above all other things is adult choice. And that has eclipsed also what's best for children. And that's actually what this report is about. And if we go back to the working mother debate, of course, I don't want to demonise working mothers, but the objective truth is that for the first 2 years of a child's life, with rare exceptions, the best place for it to be is with its mother. That's just kind of biological, psychological fact. And yet, because that impinges on women's choice, we've found it almost impossible to talk about that, even if it is objectively best for baby. And, you know, lots of the problems we've got, pornography. You know, the reason that pornography is allowed now, which it never was in the past, we have a strong history of obscenity laws in this country. Hardcore porn was not allowed in this country until the end of the 20th century. The reason that we won't crack down on it and stop children from watching it is because adult choice, and it's all about adult autonomy again. And actually that's a deeply unconservative view, because being a conservative is all about passing on the best from one generation to the next to the next. And you can't do that unless you put some restrictions on adult autonomy. And having a child is the biggest restriction on adult autonomy ever. And yet it's absolutely essential for the raising of the next generation. Now, we could talk all day about how to solve this. I think part of the problem is that we all start adulthood so late now, not just women, but men as well. And actually, one of the solutions to lost boys is for boys to start work a lot earlier.
I mean, I feel less negative about kind of childcare than... I feel less negative about kind of childcare than I think some of the panel feel. I mean, certainly above a certain age, you know, good quality childcare can have a really good impact for young kids. The question is, how do you get good quality childcare, and what age do we set that cut-off on? But I think where I agree with the panel is enabling more people to make the choice to take a career break if they want and, you know, focus on their family is a really positive thing to be encouraging. And often our system at the moment is not very encouraging that. It makes it very difficult for people to do that. And I think we could kind of solve two problems with one kind of policy here, because if we could make the system more friendly to men also staying home for some of that time, that would both reduce the penalty to women if they want to go and work. And also, I mean, this is anecdotal, but I speak to a lot of my friends who've just started having kids, you know, not manly to stay at home, or that, you know, women are supposed to stay home. We could have a kind of better system overall, but it needs us to think carefully about how we enable that to happen.
Thank you, Harry. Question down here, I think. Oh, we've got the mic for you.
Hi, my name's Ellie. I'm 22 and I'm a volunteer for the Sea Cadets. So I'd just like to come back to the point from Camilla, if I may, about men not volunteering because of the idea that people think they might be paedophiles. And I think the Sea Cadets is proof that this isn't the case. Our volunteers and trusted adults are 59% male and are often seen to be the trusted people that our cadets and our young people will go to rather than their school teachers or sometimes even those adults that they have at home. And there's often the kind of gendered expectation that men work longer hours. So if we were able to come back to something like statutory volunteering leave, for example, we may be able to enable more male volunteers to join our organisation and other organisations like ours. And at the Sea Cadets, as I know is the case with many other organisations, we have a very robust recruitment policy, safeguarding training, DBS for all of our volunteers in England and PVG in Scotland. So what can we do to kind of enable more male volunteers to be a part of these organisations?
Camilla?
Well, we were discussing this at the panel last week, and I was saying that often, just on a school level, when you get PTAs and things are often dominated by women, and I was saying that if we wanted to solve the fatherless problem, you should have a sort of, you know, a dad's net, basically. You should have a dad's net in every school where a number of dads... It was inspired, actually, by this Instagram guy who basically recognised there were quite a few fatherless sons in his own child's school, and so